Hermes and Catherine Gimboris to give you an update of the many things that are going on in Washington and what we're doing on our students and you all's behalf. I'll give people a grace period of about 75 seconds to log on, and then we'll get started because we have a lot of topics to get through this afternoon. Thanks everybody for being with us. We're pleased to report to you on a lot of different activities. Okay, why don't we start moving through the slides, Jim? So this is the topics that we're going to be talking about through this presentation, which will last an hour. And as usually is the case, we will be making the slides available to everybody who's participated in the webinar. Some of the slides are quite text heavy, so you needn't be furiously scribbling down what's on the slides. We will make them available to you. And then this first slide points out what everybody already knows, which is that there's an election coming in about 5 months from now. And I did want to just point out a few of the major political changes that are in the offing or possibly in the offing after the election, because that does shape to an extent the work that we do here in DC. First of all, starting in the Senate, I think everybody on this call will be aware of this, which is that both Senator Bill Cassidy and Tom Tillis won't be returning to the Senate next year. Senator Cassidy, physician, lost his primary election, didn't even make the runoff election, and as everybody knows, he's the chair right now of the Senate Health Committee. He's been very open and accessible and friendly to community colleges, so he's a big loss for us, regardless of whether or not the Senate changes party control, and that, of course, is highly uncertain. We're going to miss Senator Cassidy big time, but that's the nature of things. And then Senator Tom Tillis is not on the Education Committee, but he's on the Finance Committee, and he stepped forwarded with the work of a number of our North Carolina institutions to originally co-sponsor the Tax-Free Pell Grant Act with Senator Grassley from Iowa, and he chose not to run for re-election, and so we're really going to miss him as well. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the political objectives that we have and needs that we have with tax-free Pell. The next bullet has the names of three representatives, Democrats who are currently in the minority, who are in the ranking position of the committees, and who, if the House changes party control in November, will become chairs of those committees, or at least that's the plan right now for those three committees, and that's Appropriations with Rosa DeLauro, Bobby Scott with the Education and Workforce Committee, and then Representative Richard Neal, who would become chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. We're not going to talk about it explicitly today, but do want to mention that Representative Neal has been a big supporter historically of the TAC program, and in fact, enacted the original legislation that led to the $2 billion TAC program that was enacted some time ago. And then finally, and this is political science 101, but people should realize that whatever happens in terms of Congress, the Trump administration will be the Trump administration for another, 2.5 years. And so the executive branch will, remain under the control of President Trump and his appointees, and so that also will that's one thing that will not change whatever happens in November. So with that as a really brief overview, I'm going to turn things over to Jim to talk about the appropriations process, which has been really front and center in our primary legislative concern for a number of months now. So Jim, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, David, and welcome everyone. Glad you could join us today. Just in terms generally of where we are before diving into some of the details of the bills we've seen so far. So as is often the case, the House is a little bit out in front in terms of considering appropriations bills. Remember, under normal order, there are 12 appropriations bills that the Congress is supposed to get through. And as is always generally the case, the House bills are partisan bills. So, and that typically means like when we have Republican control, like we do now, we see bills coming out of the House that entail some spending cuts. But on the flip side, when the Democrats are in control of the House, that means we often see bills coming out with higher funding levels than we know that we're going to see at the end of the day. So the bills that entail some of the spending cuts are in many ways reflective of the Trump administration's budget, but in many ways they are not. And in fact, in some instances, the cuts that you see in the actual appropriations bills are not as large as what was called for in the administration's budget, and in many cases also. Even if the overall number is about the same in terms of cuts, they are done in different ways than what was laid out in the budget. The Senate Appropriations Committee, as I just alluded to a minute ago, is on a slower track. And that is because, in generally speaking, the Senate does endeavor to produce at the committee level appropriations bills that have bipartisan support. Because in order to pass anything through the full Senate, you're going to need that bipartisan support. And so the macro issue over in the Senate side now is the fact that the Republicans and the Democrats, Senator Collins, the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, and Senator Murray, the ranking minority member, they have yet to agree on top line funding levels for defense and non-defense programs and how to achieve some sort of parity between those things. And so that is kind of like the first thing that you need to do, particularly if you are aiming to produce bipartisan spending bills. So that is still an impasse over there in the Senate. They did have a few of those 12 appropriations bills scheduled for committee markups, and those markups have been postponed. And we have not yet seen a date for a markup of our key appropriations bill, which is the labor, HHS, and education funding bill. And so all that adds up to the fact that we are definitely, well, I can't say definitely, but with high degree of certainty, we are not going to see any final funding legislation until after the election and possibly spilling over into next year. And, we may have some bumps along the way in terms of government shutdowns and whatnot. We'll just have to see. But this is a long process, even though there's a lot of activity going on right now on the House side anyway. So let's get into a little bit about that House Labor, HHS, and Education funding bill. It was just marked up by the full Appropriations Committee just yesterday. And you can see here some of the numbers in terms of what is in there. There is a 10% cut for the Department of Education. That's about an $8 billion cut overall. So obviously that is an aspect of the bill that concerns us. Our major focus, as many of you know, in the appropriations process has been and will continue to be what Congress does to address the rather large shortfall in the Pell Grant program. We face a shortfall of close to $17 billion in the FY27 year, and Congress has to deal with that one way or another. So what did the House bill do? Well, first of all, on the plus side, they included a $50 increase to the Pell Grant Maximum Award, and they added some discretionary funding to the program, about $250 million worth, in order to pay for that. And then for the shortfall itself, what the bill did was permanently end subsidized undergraduate federal student loans, and as a pay for 1 year patch for the shortfall. So the bill adds $16 billion just a 1 year, and that $16 billion doesn't go into the baseline. I'll talk about that in a second. And in order to pay for that, again, as I said, the bill ends subsidized loans for undergraduates. While this is a mixed bag for us. On the one hand, we're happy that the Appropriations Committee addressed the shortfall in their bill. We are happy about that bump up in the maximum award. But what we're really pushing for overall as we continue on this process is a fix to the Pell Grant shortfall that is not just a 1 year fix, because we don't want I don't think really anyone wants to be back here next year at this time talking about how we're gonna plug the shortfall that will be in there next year. So the way that we hope Congress does that is to add money to the actual baseline budget of the Pell Grant program. That was actually done in the Trump administration's budget. Granted, they did pay for that by making a lot of cuts to other education programs, but they added $10.5 billion right into the budget baseline for the Pell Grant program. And by doing that, you make it much easier then to deal with the funding in the out years after that if it's built into baseline. Okay, beyond Pell Grants, we did see deep cuts to the other student aid programs, or some of them anyway, SEOG, Federal Work Study. And then beyond student aid, we also saw deep cuts actually in the elimination of the adult basic education grants program, international education program also eliminated, and strong cuts to the FIPSI program. Once again, the appropriations bill, just as it did last year, leaves the door open for consolidating most of the Higher Education Act Title III minority serving institutions programs into one, and Title V, the HSI program, into one, what we call supersized SIP program, Strengthening Institutions program. So that is most, very high likelihood that will happen again in FY27. The committee report that was released along with this bill does include individual funding levels for all those programs, all the MSI programs. But again, the language of the bill allows the administration to aggregate almost all those into one big program. The House did actually add $11 million into this area that could go into that super SIP program, and $10 million of that was for the SIP program itself. So some good news there also in terms of just the overall amount of money available for Title III and Title V. And then we also small increases for TRIO, Gear Up, and the Perkins CTE programs. Over in the Department of Labor, that in a percentage-wise took a much bigger cut, as you can see here, 27%. For us, the big highlight of the bill was the fact that it increased the Strengthening Community College Training Grants program by $10 million to a $75 million funding level. We've been advocating, along with you all, very strongly to get an increase in that program, and it paid off in terms of all of our collective advocacy because that was done in the bill, and that will really help us a lot in having a good having where we want to be going into the Senate bill, and no matter what they do there. Elsewhere, there are very deep cuts to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act adult and youth funding streams. They're both essentially eliminated. And then apprenticeship grants, which have been a real darling the last several years from both parties, those were bumped up by $5 million to $290 million for FY27. And then looking outside of the labor, HHS, and education appropriations bill, another program that we've really been prioritizing this year is the National Science Foundation Advanced Technological Education Program. And that, just as it was last year in FY26, the House basically eliminated the STEM Education Directorate at the NSF, and that carries with it the ATE program. So, at the end of the day, that would eliminate the $75 million in funding that the ATE program currently has. As I mentioned, that is exactly what happened in the House bill last year, but that is not where we wound up. We wound up with level funding because that was what was included in the Senate bill, and then eventually the final funding bill for the FY26. That is the Senate Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill. That is one of the bills that I mentioned a few minutes ago that had been scheduled for a markup and has been postponed. So in other words, we haven't seen yet what is in the Senate bill, and in fact, the funding for the ATE program isn't actually in the bill itself; it's in the accompanying report. So we're going to have to wait and see when that markup gets rescheduled to see where we are in terms of that program. And then just in terms of some of the things that we've been advocating for during this process, and we've done a couple of alerts so far, and I'm sure there'll be more coming out to you all in the membership to advocate for these priorities. Some of which I've already mentioned. Of course, we want to see the Pell Grant shortfall funded in full and then done in full, meaning some sort of approach where we're taking care of in future years, not just the coming fiscal year. Uh, and then, the SECTG, we're halfway there in terms of getting that increase of $10 million to $75 million. And we're pushing also for a $10 million increase in the ATE program to a level of $85 million. So much more to come in terms of appropriations. Okay, the next topic, we're going to delve into the regulatory arena and moving away from the legislative arena for the time being. And that is one of several rulemakings that have been going on that we'll discuss today in terms of what the latest developments are. And the first one is the notice of proposed rulemaking on what we call the do no harm earnings threshold regulations. Again, this is something that was along with many of these other things that we're talking about. This was in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act from last year, and this is the new accountability system by which degree and certificate programs at the undergraduate level will be judged against the earnings of high school graduates in your state. And you can see some more of the details there in terms of the cohorts that we're talking about. Now, the latest development in there is that after negotiated rulemaking, which happened earlier this year in January, the department put out a notice of proposed rulemaking, and we, along with many others, filed comments on on those proposed rules. And you can see there some of the things that we focused on. The biggest focus that we had in our comments that took up the most space out of our comments was on this a new addition to the regulations that happened during the negotiated rulemaking, and that is an introduction of a possible consequence for what are called low earning outcome programs that would extend beyond loan eligibility to Pell Grant eligibility as well. So keep in mind that overall, if a program is found to be a low earning outcome program, under the metrics of this regulation, then it stands to lose direct loan eligibility for the most part. But if more than 50% of Title IV dollars or more than 50% of a school's Title IV recipients are in low earning outcome programs, then in that case, after a couple of years of that situation, a school might lose all Title IV eligibility for their low earning outcome program. So our main objection to that was that this is not envisioned in statute and it exceeds statutory authority by moving away from by extending beyond consequences that are centered on the loan program and get into the area of all Title IV. One of our other comments was also the fact that we believe that certificate programs should be measured against a younger age cohort. So for degree programs, that's set in statute. They're judged against the high school diploma holders aged 25 to 34 in the state. And our point there was that if you're talking about a 25 to 34 age cohort, you're talking about people that have been out of school for up to about 16 years, and a lot of things have happened in that time that affects those people's earnings beyond the level of education that they achieved. So we think that if you're really trying to center in on the level of education as a factor in what a given worker is earning, then you need to go to a much younger cohort that reflects people that have more recently come out of high school. So that was our comment there. The Department of Education does have the flexibility to adjust that cohort for certificate programs because they were not part of the statute. So, and remember, as we discussed, I think in the last webinar, one of the things that the department has done here is sort of basically kind of taken both the gainful employment regulations that had been on the books and this new scheme that at the statutory level only applies to degree programs and harmonize the whole thing across all, certificate and degree programs. So there's a varying degrees of flexibility depending on what kind of program you're talking about that the department has to make changes. And of course, the other aspect of the regulations is a new tuition and transparency survey that is called the Student Tuition and Transparency System, or STATS. So that is where we are on that particular regulation. And to talk about one that is actually a final rule now in Workforce Pell, I'll turn it back over to David.
Thank you, Jim. And before we get into the workforce Pell regs and then a couple other even more elaborate and complicated regulations, just wanted to mention a couple things. First of all, just to underscore what Jim said about the Pell Grant program, and the importance from our perspective of making sure that the financing for that program remains on solid ground. And while, as Jim said, we were cheered that the subcommittee responded to our advocacy that this needed to be addressed, the short-term solution of using savings from the student loan, the direct loan program, to plug the hole for only 1 year and technically a number of years after that is just insufficient from our point of view because they'll be right back in the same position they were this year, next year, without an offset from the loan programs to use. And the Trump administration had proposed a very generous, substantial $10.5 billion to support that Pell program. And as Jim described, the money would have gone into the program itself and more or less been part of the base, as we call it. So it would have been assumed to be a recurring expenditure in future years. So attention now very much turns to the Senate, and our strong hope that our advocacy over there with other higher education groups will result in a different policy approach for the Pell program, because as everybody knows, it's the most important federal program for our students and campuses by a lot. The other thing I wanted to mention was just to highlight a new publication that AACC has started as of a couple weeks ago, and that's our Washington Watch Weekly. Most of you will be familiar with the Washington Watch articles that we do as part of our CC Daily, and that will continue. But we are pulling some of those articles and highlighting the most important policy issues that we're working on. And the publication is a little bit different because it talks about what we're advocating on as opposed to what's happening. Although we sometimes mention advocacy in the daily as well, as you know. So we encourage all of you to subscribe to this. It's obviously no cost, and I asked Catherine to put in the chat the link that you can use to sign up for this weekly publication that comes out on Friday afternoon. So Washington Watch Weekly. So moving into the workforce Pell, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. As Jim just mentioned a moment ago, the final regulation has taken effect. The administration remains very strongly committed to the program, wants to highlight it. It's something that the administration did support early on. Everything we've heard from our members at the state and individual campus level indicates that there is not going to be a lot of programs that are going to be ready by July 1, maybe even no programs that will be submitted to the department for approval by them, which is when the program starts. We do remain extremely interested in hearing from you about any particular experiences you're having, good ones or bad ones, in terms of the state administration of this program, which is really the key entity at this point in terms of allowing programs to be recognized or approved by the department. So, and I mention that because again, we get a lot of inquiries from all over the Hill and from the executive branch and the media as well about what exactly is going on in Workforce Pell. So if any of you want to put anything right now into the chat, please feel free. So moving on a little bit into the substance of the regulations, and as we've described previously, the rule that was agreed to by negotiators in NEGREG and was proposed by the administration initially, is very similar to the statute. There weren't a lot of changes from what Congress passed last summer in the regulation that was proposed and finalized by the department. There are a couple areas where the department diverged from what was in the law. We asked the department to not do that because in those cases it was worked against what we thought was the best interests of our institutions in getting programs approved, and that was for naught. The two items that I'd highlight here are, first of all, the fact that after 3 years, the placement rate of 70%, which institutions are going to have to meet for their workforce Pell programs, will have to be in the field for which the training was provided. And there's no requirement in the law that addresses that. It simply says you have to be placed at a 70% rate. So we are, thank you, Emily. So we are disappointed in that. And then the other thing that was also a divergence from the law itself is that the programs have to be in not just in operation for 1 year, but compliant with all the workforce Pell standards for 1 year in order to be approved. And the law doesn't say that. And in some cases, we are understanding that some of our institutions have had to alter their programs in ways that will basically set the clock back a number of months, if not a full year, as they modify programs to comply with the law or the regulation, excuse me. So those are the main items on workforce Pell. The next issue in the regulatory level I want to talk about is a monster of an issue. It's one that we had not focused on per se previously because this had never been taken up in the regulatory context, and that is the uniform guidance, which is issued by the Office of Management and Budget. And basically, the uniform guidance sets the table, outlines the procedures that the governmental agencies need to follow and grantees need to follow in order to qualify for federal funding. This was always called uniform guidance, and again, it's been issued by the Office of Management and Budget because it was just guidance, not a formal rule, which has the force of law. However, under the OMB proposal, the uniform guidance would become law in the form of a regulation, and so it changes its compliance status and its legal status for institutions. There's a 45-day comment period on this. AACC will submit comments on it. It is again, it's a very wide-ranging regulation because it affects both the way that the Office of Management and Budget deals with the government agencies that comprise the federal government, but it also relates to the criteria, the qualifications that institutions and all federal grantees need to meet in order to receive federal funds. So in the next couple of slides, I'm just going to outline a few of the major issues that we have identified as being most important to our campuses. This is by no means a comprehensive account, and I'm not going to try to go into them in any detail, but it's good to know that a number of the items in this proposed rule are reflective of and very similar to, if not identical to, some of the executive orders that the Trump administration has issued previously. And on this first slide here, it's basically to just use shorthand, it's the DEI issue and focus that would be codified in regulations, and the policies of the administration in this area would be required for institutions to meet in order to qualify for federal funds. And you can, read. We'll send you these slides, and you can go on our website to get more information on this. But these are some of the policies that federal grantees and subawardees will need to follow in order to remain eligible to receive federal funds. Keeping in mind, and this is always important, that the underlying law, the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission implementation of of some of those policies. They remain the same in terms of law and regulation, and those haven't changed. However, the certifications that institutions will need to make about what their campuses are doing as a condition of receiving funding will have changed if this is implemented as proposed. So it's a matter of high attention and concern for us. The other the other general area that the new regulation gets into concerns just the basic processes that are used for federal grants. Again, both from a internal governmental perspective as well as how it affects individual applicants. And so, what this regulation as proposed would do would be to put in again into a formal regulatory status some of the things that the administration has done in a less formal fashion before. Really, two things. One, they issued an executive order about the role that political appointees would play in the grants making process. And then two, the rule would essentially confirm what the administration has already done more in its earlier days and recently in the form of giving to itself again, in a formal fashion, the authority to cancel grants based on a variety of, or based on their own determination that the individual grantee is not acting in accordance with the public interest, or as was said earlier, it does not effectuate the program priorities of the administration. So really what this regulation would do is reintroduce or introduce in a different way more uncertainty about grants. We can't say for sure whether or not this would have a large impact on grants, but it certainly will put the administration in a position to act in a more unilateral fashion and a less predictable fashion than it has previously. And I think that's all I will say about this at the time. Again, we will submit comments on this. This is a huge regulation. It affects research institutions even more than it does community colleges because it gets into a variety of aspects of how science is funded. But again, it would introduce a political aspect to grant awards, at least potentially. And then one other thing I wanted to say, which is good news and does relate to research, and that is that the proposed rule formally rejects the administration's earlier efforts to try to cap indirect costs. And we know that indirect cost recovery is important in different ways for our campuses. Different programs will allow greater reimbursement of those costs, but primarily due to political pressure, as far as anybody can tell, this new regulation will formally back off the administration from capping indirect costs. And then finally, the last regulatory issue that I'll talk about relates to accreditation, and this is something that campuses are more familiar with than the uniform guidance. And just to back up and provide a little bit of context, the Department of Education has the authority to write rules that the accrediting agencies have to meet in order to be able to approve institutions to get student financial aid. And there was no change in the law that necessitates the department revising these rules, but it's been a high priority for the administration from the start to alter the way that accreditation works. And make no mistake about it, there are a number of very significant changes to the process that would be put into effect as a result of this rule. And like a number of other negotiated rulemaking sessions, I think even all of them that have been undertaken for higher education, this regulation also achieved consensus in the Neg-Reg committee, which concluded, I think it was on May 21st. And as this slide points out, Monty Sullivan, the former head of the Louisiana Community Technical College System, was negotiator. So we had an edge there, but nothing largely deterred the administration from pursuing its priorities. And as this slide mentioned, we'll submit comments on this. It's quite possible the administration may be sued, or at least that's what some speculation is, because of their overstepping allegedly their statutory authority and some of the things that they've proposed. And then finally, as this slide also points out, useful to know that or note that the what used to be known as the regional accrediting agencies, which were of course the agencies that um, uh, exclusively accredited AACC members and nonprofit higher education overwhelmingly, they did not have a seat at the table as a primary negotiator. It was a for-profit accrediting agency that had that seat at the table. So that certainly reflects, the administration's perspective on who they wanted to be um, voicing the accreditation point of view in the primary role. So before I turn things over to Catherine, do want to just mention a few of the major features of the regulation. And the first bullet on this slide here is a win for community colleges. It remains to be seen exactly how it will work out in practice, but the rule that was agreed to requires institutions who have a student coming in who has credits from a institution that's been approved by an accreditation agency, excuse me, that was recognized by the department, that those students, their credits would have to be accepted unless the receiving institution provided a rationale for that, and that could be appealed. And the institution would also have to articulate what their standards are for evaluating credit. So that is obviously a really big deal for community colleges. We think overall it's going to be a big step forward for us. How it is implemented, the processes that institutions are going to put forward, and the particular standards they're going to use, we'll see over time. But we think overall that this is a positive development for us. This one area is really the most important one, but I'll just quickly mention some of the other things that are in the reg as agreed to that do reflect things that the administration has been talking about for a number of months. One of them, this isn't so much something that has gotten attention before, but it's at least my personal interpretation of this, it's a little bit of a dig at tenure, which is to say that the standards of faculty have to be, for reviewing them, have to be the same for all faculty members. So basically, it's a way of requiring certain examination of tenured faculty and all faculty. The next one is the administration got into the thorny issue of academic freedom, and requires the creditors to review academic freedom protections that are provided to faculty. But that, again, as this last bullet in the slide points out, they have to be provided under certain conditions. And essentially, the administration, the effort seems to be to try to just guarantee that regardless of whether it's somebody on the left or somebody on the right whose views may be somewhat controversial, whichever end of the spectrum they're at, that they get the same treatment. Something else that would be really important for accreditors, it's being done already in some places on this next slide, is the application of programmatic accreditation standards. Accreditors will have to now look at individual programs in the area of student achievement as well as the overall student achievement. And that's a new requirement. And then as these two sub-bullets point out, there are some other more specific requirements and aspects of student achievement that the accreditors will be required to look at. Without being able to kind of tease out all the nuances, on this next bullet talks about the requirement that there be some kind of balance of and intellectual diversity on campuses. The The third from the last bullet here relates to programmatic accreditors, where by all accounts they are going to have to undertake new processes to remain separate, independent as they're required to under law from any kind of membership aspect that they have. And then the next to last one was one that really came out of nowhere. It's the last one that I'll mention, and that is that accreditors also will have to do, as this bullet says, undertake some kind of a cost-benefit analysis for how the institutions are allocating their resources. And from my point of view, it's anybody's guess about how actually you go about applying cost-benefit analysis to many of the things that colleges do. But this will have to be put into effect over time, assuming this regulation is finalized. So with that, we're going to plod on with even some more regulatory overview for you. Catherine, please talk about the new verification policies.
Sure. So I want to start here with just a few updates from the Department of Education on the federal financial aid process. The first you've heard us talk about before, which is a new real-time identity verification process to help institutions deal with the problem of ghost students and fraudulent applicants for federal student aid. This rolled out on April 26th, and essentially, instead of having potentially fraudulent applicants have their FAFSAs submitted to or transmitted rather to institutions and then later requesting verification of those applications, Ed is now screening those applications in real time and transmitting them to institutions with a flag on whether or not they think they're fraudulent. If an application is screened by the algorithm and has been determined to have been fraudulent with a highest degree of confidence, that ICER will be transmitted as rejected to the college, and the college won't have to do anything at all. They do have a sort of last, I guess, last option if for some reason in the very small likelihood that a legitimate student was flagged as fraudulent, that student could contact the institution and the institution would be able to initiate what's called a V4 or V5 identity verification process. We are not sure how likely that is to happen. The department seems pretty confident with their algorithm only having a 0.4 false positive rate. So there shouldn't be students coming to your campus who are legitimate students who've been caught by this. But as always, this is a brand new process that the administration has rolled out. And so please stay in close contact with us on how this is operating on your campuses. If you're experiencing glitches here and there, or for some reason you think that there are populations that either shouldn't have been captured by this algorithm or that aren't being captured by this algorithm that you're seeing as potentially fraudulent through other means. The other big FAFSA update this cycle is that sorry, can we go back one more slide? Yes, is that the FSA, the Office of Federal Student Aid, announced real-time FAFSA processing starting with this past update. That means that when students and contributors complete their FAFSA submission summary page, so that congratulations, you submitted a FAFSA page, will now display their estimated aid. It will also display to them immediately if they need to go back and initiate any corrections. So this is a really great update to the FAFSA process for students. The FAFSA team at the Department of Education has talked a lot about wanting to ensure that there are as few opportunities as possible for students to fall out of the process between beginning a FAFSA and successfully completing and submitting a FAFSA. This is part of that. They'd be able to go back and do corrections to their FAFSA in the same session rather than waiting days or a week to get that flag that they needed for their action. Also, through this update, colleges, your financial aid offices on your college campus will be able to view applicants' information through the FAFSA portal itself, rather than all of these disparate places where that information had lived before. And the department announced that they are continuing to work on real-time ICER transmission. So institutions being able to get those ICERs in real time, again, to cut back on back and forth as much as possible. So we're hoping to see an update on where they are, and that's likely the fall. But we're very excited about this new update. And again, we really want to hear from our colleges on how this real-time identity verification is going. It's going to be important for us to stay in touch on that. Next slide. Speaking of real-time identity verification happening at the department, this is an area of interest for legislators in Congress as well. There's been a huge push from primarily congressional Republicans, House Republicans, but bipartisan as well, to ensure integrity of federal programs, including federal financial aid. So in addition to a large package of anti-fraud bills affecting a number of federal programs, the House has moved forward a bill that would codify this new real-time identity screening protocol at the Department of Education. It is called the No Aid for Ghost Students Act, and the actual original No Aid for Ghost Students Act was just that. It was just codifying the new protocol. There was a second bill called the Student Aid Fraud Oversight and Accountability Act that integrated expectations for institutions under the new protocol into standards for prioritization of program reviews. Those two have been consolidated into the new, same name as the first one, No Aid for Ghost Students Act, that was considered by the full House yesterday. It was approved on a voice vote, but we're still waiting on a recorded vote to confirm its passage in that chamber. There's a companion bill that's been introduced in the Senate, but my guess and our hope is that we are going to be able to work with the Senate Health Committee to make some small improvements to that bill and ensure it's as workable and that it's as good as possible if that is to be enacted. But again, this is where it's really, really important for us to hear from you all on how this protocol is being operationalized on your campus and if there's anything that we need to keep in mind before this perhaps gets codified into law. And then finally, there was another bill in the House that isn't going anywhere, but we did want to flag just in case folks mention it to you. As part of the package that initially introduced the two ghost student bills, there was another that would require enhanced information on citizenship for FAFSA contributors as part of identity verification. That was not advanced with the bill that was approved by the House. So we just wanted to give a general update there, but we're not as that one's not likely to move forward, so we're not expending as much energy on that one. Okay, and finally, as though there wasn't enough going on, the Hill is still very interested in transparency. Obviously, on the Trump administration side, there's a lot of transparency interest around outcomes and earnings, but I'd say right now most of the energy in the Hill is around transparency in college costs, loan origination, and repayment policy. So there are still bipartisan and partisan bills to improve financial aid offers and further standardize those offers. The one that AACC has endorsed is the Improving Financial Aid Offers for Students Act, which was introduced by Chair Cassidy of the Senate Health Committee. We have not heard a good deal about what the likelihood for that moving is. It seems like a few things have stalled, but this is an area where we may see some increased activity, especially as we get a better sense of what November is going to look like and after. So we do want to keep this on folks' radar. And that's it for me. Oh, sorry, I have the farm bill. I forgot that was it for me on the higher ed bills. We also, again, to keep on folks' radar, we did want to mention that we do have a priority in the farm bill around creating new capacity building grants for community college agriculture and renewable resources programs. This is something we've been working for several years as the farm bill has been up for reauthorization for several years and the can keeps getting kicked down the road. This would be a fairly small program. We're fighting for a small authorization, but it would be the first time that community colleges get dedicated funding from USDA for our programs that contribute rather to the agriculture workforce development. So we're excited that this was included, a version of this program was included in the farm bill that passed the House. And we're hopeful that when the Senate finally unveils theirs, it will be included in that as well. And we'll be sure to keep you all updated. Maybe this is the year we finally get the farm bill taken care of. We'll see.
And speaking of maybe this is the year, maybe next year will be the year where we will secure passage of the Tax-Free Pell Grant Act. We're going to close our presentation with a reminder that in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last summer, we were disappointingly unsuccessful in getting the Tax-Free Pell Grant included in that, even though it was a big tax bill. And however, we're not giving up. We still believe in the rightness of this bill. I We put this slide as part of this presentation because we wanted to serve as a reminder that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that some of our chief sponsors are leaving Congress, and in this particular case, Senator Tillis, who was an original co-sponsor in the Senate and the Finance Committee, is leaving, and then three out of the four, and it's bipartisan in both chambers, two and two lead sponsors. Three out of the four sponsors in the House won't be returning to the House of Representatives next year. Representative Feenstra from Iowa lost his primary race for governor just last week. And then there are two long-serving Democrats, Lloyd Doggett and Danny Davis from Texas and Illinois, respectively, who are not going to be coming back to Congress. So with that as a reminder that the work never ends. Would like to invite you all to participate in our efforts in Washington in September for our Advocates in Action meeting. A number of you on the call I know have attended. We've lined up a number of really great speakers already for this. We haven't released any program details, but I can assure you that it'll be as good a program as always. And given the timing of events, there's probably going to be a tremendous amount related to funding and maybe some of the higher education legislation that Catherine mentioned that we'll be working on in the fall. But we do hope that you can join us. And with that, let's see what, if any, questions there are for us.
One just came in actually. So are we seeing any signs that with the implementation of political review of grant
Mm.
applications by senior personnel, is there any concern about colleges in blue states not being judged on merit and need?
Well, as I mentioned, the uniform guidance does explicitly allow the agencies to make decisions on a non-peer review, non-merit review basis. We have heard of some institutions who are of the mind that their grants have been either terminated or not renewed, canceled or not renewed for political reasons. So I would say that well, that's what we know. And one other thing, though, just by way of context in this, is to just remind everybody that grants have always had a policy element to them. Certainly, the Biden administration put forward grant priorities that were in keeping with its priorities, and that influenced the nature of the awards that were made in a variety of programs. And that's what the Trump administration has done. And I think that that is more dispositive in terms of who gets the money than any individual decisions about the political nature of the state that the applicant is coming from. And so, as we mentioned in the course of the webinar, that, for example, the administration has made workforce Pell a huge priority. It was in FIPSI where you wouldn't normally expect it. It was included in institutional aid, the big Super SIP program, where you wouldn't not normally have expected it either, along with career pathways. So this is an example of ways that, regardless of the authority that the executive branch might take to cancel grants, that they have a strong ability to shape them.
And then next we have a question regarding the fact that, particularly with several recent federal grant opportunities, that the grant application window has been very short. And for the person who asked the question, this makes it challenging for colleges to plan strategically and collaborate effectively. Are we hearing similar feedback from others? Yes, we are. Is there an opportunity to relay this concern to the relevant agencies.
Yeah, let me just say that the uniform guidance regulations, one of the things that we like about it is that they prescribe a minimum of 30 days for applications, but we know that 30 days is too limited, and we know that the fact that there have been delays in making grants available within a given funding year that has put even more stress than usual on institutions to generate applications. We do communicate this. We have communicated this to agencies. Um, they know this. I can't, I'm not going to give you false insurance that it's going to be those grant periods are extended, but we appreciate being notified about that or reminded of that. And but although we don't really need it, but we will keep urging that agencies give the maximum amount of time for our colleges. And we know particularly our smaller colleges, not just only those, but they have a special resource issue in terms of developing grant applications in a short time.
I'm going to skip down for the moment to the last question. There was mention of small increases in the TRIO program in the House Appropriations Bill. Have there been any discussions of regarding the program's continuation within, during this administration? And well, there's a couple of things about that I'll mention. One is, and this applies beyond TRIO, but starting with last year's appropriation bill, and we saw the same thing in the House appropriations bill so far this year. There was additional language in the appropriations bill last year about basically more language directing the administration to spend the money on a program level basis in a way that that is laid out in the appropriations bill. So, in other words, not leaving room for some of the maneuvers that we saw in FY25 when when there's less restrictive language and a less restrictive situation in terms of movement of funds between programs by the administration. Now, in terms of TRIO, the other issue there this year has been the fact that there's been a lot of pushback and concern about the nature of the competition for some of the TRIO programs themselves, both in terms of move to making it a more state-oriented program, and also as it's done in other programs, including the SIP program, applying the administration's priorities, which are very workforce development focused. There is language actually there was part of an amendment made to the appropriations bill yesterday. There is language now in the House appropriations bill that essentially is a pushback to that in terms of TRIO. The TRIO lobby is very effective, so they got some language in the bill. I don't think it would apply to the program applications or grant competitions that have already gone out in FY26, but more looking forward. And basically, what it is about is returning TRIO programs to how they're really originally much envisioned by statute. So there is language in the appropriations bill to that effect. And then we have another question about movement on facilitating approval of workforce Pell programs in other states. And well, I'll just say generally we have a lot of conversations and we're aware that states are in very different places. We're starting to really getting a better fix now, and actually, Emily, from your comment in the chat earlier, that was very helpful in terms of number of programs. But we're starting to hear, more now about the fact that some states seem to be ready to go and programs are going in for approval, but are trying to get a better fix on that. So any feedback from all of you, either in the chat here right now, or you can always email us. And we're always looking for more information about that. And we know that the administration is very eager to learn more about some of those, those early programs and what's in the hopper, basically.
Okay, well, we are right at time. In response to one of the questions, we will make as I mentioned at the top of the show, that we would be sending out to all the registered webinar participants a copy of these slides. So you will be receiving those. And I guess the other thing before we break is not just to thank you again for being involved in what we're doing, because we certainly couldn't get things done without your involvement. But also, if you have any suggestions about ways that we can improve these webinars, um, I know it's a very high bar to no, we get good feedback on the webinars, but I'm sure there are things that we could be doing that would be make it better for you. So if you do have any suggestions, we are open to constructive criticisms or suggestions for improvements. And then I just hope that whatever team you're rooting for in the the NBA Finals is wins. And I'm just as a nonpartisan advocate, I just say I'm rooting for a 7-game finals is what I am. And thanks everybody again for being with us. And we'll see you next month as part of our monthly webinars. Thanks again.